Donald Trump may have hoped that the Epstein Files debacle was behind him, but that may not be the case. At the disastrous Oval Office presser earlier today, he was asked by reporters about an Epstein Files update, causing Trump to become visibly panicked as he doubled down on the idea that this was a Democratic hoax meant to destroy him. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends. We're going to play this clip of Donald Trump being asked about an Epstein Files update regarding the House Oversight Committee and the Justice Department, and I'll see you on the other side.
Your Justice Department is also sending some of the Epstein Files over to the House Oversight Committee today. Are you in support of them releasing all of them?
Keeping it open.
If they wanted to release,
people shouldn't be hurt, but I'm in support of keeping it totally open. I couldn't care less. You got a lot of people that it could be mentioned in those files that don't deserve to be. People, because he knew everybody in Palm Beach. I don't know anything about that, but I have said to Pam and everybody else, give them everything you can give them, because it's a Democrat hoax. It's just a hoax. The whole Epstein thing is a Democrat hoax. So we had the greatest 6 months, 7 months in the history of the presidency, and the Democrats don't know what to do, so they keep bringing up that stuff. But it affected them. Bill Clinton was on his plane and went to the island supposedly 28 times. I don't want to bring that up, frankly. You have Larry, whatever his name is, Summers, the head of Harvard, who was Jeffrey Epstein's best friend. Nobody ever talks about that. I mean, but I don't want to hurt Larry Summers, but he was best friends with Jeffrey Epstein. No, this is a Democratic hoax to try and get the significance of what we've done over the past 7 months. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. They say it's #1 in history.
Who's they? The people in this room? You say, Donald? Nobody's saying, or credible is saying that this is the best presidency in American history, except for perhaps, again, Trump himself, who is neither sane nor credible. The fact of the matter is, the Jeffrey Epstein situation is a mess of Trump's own making. Again, Trump campaigned, and Trump surrogates campaigned on releasing the Epstein files. He made a commitment not just to his voters, but to the American people, and he's trying to renege on that commitment. I think he was hoping that the fact that it was relatively quiet over the past few weeks would cause it to go away, but it's not. Politico has a pretty good article about this. Why the Epstein drama isn't going away anytime soon. The DOJ is expected to make heavy redactions for an initial tranche of Epstein documents. The Justice Department is expected on Friday to start handing the first batch of Jeffrey Epstein files over to Congress, but it may be a while before lawmakers get the information they want, if ever. The DOJ is taking a piecemeal approach to transmitting documents to Capitol Hill, pursuant to a subpoena issued this month by the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee after Democrats on the panel forced the matter. The committee, led by Kentucky Republican Representative James Comer, anticipates receiving an initial tranche of files related to the convicted sex offender by the end of the day, August 22nd. Making these materials public, however, will be a slow, deliberative process. That's because House Oversight intends to coordinate with the Justice Department on taking steps to shield the names of the women who were victims of Epstein, who died by suicide in 2019, and information around ongoing criminal cases. Quote, the committee intends to make the records public after a thorough review to ensure all victims' identification and child sexual abuse material are redacted, said an Oversight Committee spokesperson, granted anonymity to share details about the panel's internal activities. Quote, the committee will also consult with the DOJ to ensure any documents released do not negatively impact ongoing criminal cases and investigations. If the Justice Department follows precedent, both Democrats and Republicans on House Oversight would get access to the materials, while under a typical arrangement, the majority, in this case the Republicans, would control its disclosure. Either party could release the materials unilaterally. Democrats, however, intend to review the files before releasing them publicly, according to a person familiar with Oversight Democrats' planning, speaking on condition of anonymity to share internal party strategy. The files they receive could include FBI reports of witness interviews, material seized from the searches of Epstein's vast properties in New York, the Virgin Islands, Palm Beach, and New Mexico, and the affidavits used to gain permission from judges to execute those searches. There are a variety of complicating factors to consider, among them the ongoing legal challenge that Ghislaine Maxwell, a longtime Epstein associate, is pursuing against her 20-year conviction for sex trafficking crimes. House Oversight previously subpoenaed Maxwell for testimony and is negotiating the conditions of the interview with her legal team. Maxwell, who was sentenced in 2021, is demanding that she be granted immunity from further criminal proceedings in exchange for her cooperation. The plotting process is unlikely to satisfy demands for transparency from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, though, and House GOP leaders shouldn't expect to return from the August recess free from the drama that consumed them in July. Quote, after months of stonewalling, calling Epstein Files a hoax and telling people nothing but porn exists in their possession, the administration now admits the files exist and agrees to release some of them, Representative Thomas Massie, a Republican from Kentucky, said in a social media post this week. Quote, Americans want transparency, though, not smoke and mirrors. Massie, with Representative Ro Khanna, has been leading to the charge to force a floor vote on a resolution that would compel the release of the Epstein files, and the two men say they'll follow through on plans when Congress returns to use procedural matters to call the measure up without the leadership's consent. The Massie-Khanna resolution would call for the materials to be made public with redactions only for the purposes of protecting names of victims, hiding sexually explicit content, and in instances where ongoing legal cases could be compromised. In other words, the lawmakers want to guarantee the identities of Epstein's associates, if applicable, are revealed. Last month, Speaker Mike Johnson said Republicans should give DOJ time to reveal the documents in a responsible manner that would respect the privacy of Epstein's victims. However, Donald Trump, who has had ties to Epstein, a well-known financier, was also pushing to move past the issue after his allies had stoked conspiracy theories for years about what the authorities were hiding. Yet Massie, Khanna, and allies would not budge from their stance that members must be allowed to vote to bring the files to light, disrupting the Rules Committee that tees up floor consideration for most legislation. Leaders opted to send their members home a few days ahead of schedule for the summer recess rather than stay in Washington to take politically uncomfortable votes. Democrats are also signaling they won't be satisfied by DOJ's game plan and will continue to make the issue a political headache for the Republicans. Quote, releasing the Epstein files in batches just continues this White House's cover-up. The American people will not accept anything short of the full, unredacted Epstein files, Representative Robert Garcia, the top Democrat on oversight, said in a statement. Quote, we will keep pressing until the American people get the truth, every document, every fact, in full. The administration must comply with our subpoena by law. Efforts to draw a wedge in the GOP over the Epstein files were taking place as far away as Texas this week, where Gene Wu, chair of the state's House Democratic Caucus, offered an amendment to delay Republicans' mid-decade redistricting efforts until after the release of the Epstein files. Meanwhile, back in Washington, lawmakers will regroup on Capitol Hill on September 2nd, with just 4 weeks left to avert a government shutdown, and there's already concern in GOP leadership over the time the House could waste in continuing to fight over perceived distractions. Quote, I'd really like to see this resolved, if possible, before we get back, said Representative Virginia Fox, the chair of the House Rules Committee. Quote, we're going to have a lot of work to do when we get back in September. I've already looked at my September calendar, and it looks pretty busy. Fox, whose committee's work was derailed by members' efforts to force Epstein-related votes, called the saga, quote, a tempest in a teapot. In February, the Justice Department released what it called the first phase of documents related to the Epstein investigation, which has been a fixation of some of the president's supporters. It's been long been public that Trump, along with other prominent figures like President Bill Clinton, are referenced in documents previously released in court cases surrounding Epstein. But Trump is not accused of any wrongdoing linked to Epstein, nor is, by the way, President Clinton. The real firestorm, however, began in earnest in early July when the department quietly released a memo saying that the federal government did not find evidence of a so-called Epstein client list. Conspiracists had long postulated that Epstein kept such a list of people with whom he trafficked young women, and that it was being hidden to protect the rich and powerful. No additional disclosures would be forthcoming, the unsigned memo said, which quickly and predictably set off a complicated political quagmire for the president and the GOP amid accusations that the administration was reneging on its promise for transparency. Trump, in an effort to quash the outrage, asked Attorney General Pam Bondi to seek the release of grand jury materials in the most recent investigations of Epstein and Maxwell in New York, as well as an earlier federal probe of Epstein in Florida. In recent weeks, all three judges assigned to resolve the unsealing requests rebuffed the administration, with the most recent rejection coming Wednesday. The judges said the department hadn't fully justified taking the unusual step of unsealing the secret files, and that, in any event, most of the material in the files had already been made public through Maxwell's trial or other means. Still, even if the grand jury transcripts and exhibits were made public, they represent a tiny fraction of the material the Justice Department possessions in the Epstein and Maxwell investigative files that are the subject of congressional subpoena. When the House Oversight Committee interviewed Trump's former Attorney General, Bill Barr, as part of its probe into the Epstein matter earlier this month, Barr told congressional investigators that he did not know why the documents were being withheld, according to a person familiar with this testimony and granted anonymity to describe the private conversation. The lack of transparency around the process, however, might have to do with the fact that some grand jury materials may need court approval, Barr suggested, and that current policy prohibits the release of unsubstantiated information. Ultimately, the House oversight subpoena currently represents the best chance for bringing some information to light, and for the Trump administration to get limited details released to satisfy those clamoring for action. Longstanding DOJ policies, as well as federal law, the Privacy Act of 1974, limit disclosures about living individuals investigated for potential crimes. However, that law and those DOJ rules do not apply to Congress, which is generally free to ignore individuals' pleas for discretion. DOJ has sometimes used that distinction to effectively make sensitive information public by transmitting it to Congress, with GOP and Democratic lawmakers then able to cherry pick what of the sensitive information they choose to share. A DOJ spokesperson did not request or respond to a request for comment. So, in other words, the reason that Trump is still panicking about this is because the Democrats forced the GOP to issue a subpoena, and this is when the DOJ is supposed to, comply with that subpoena, or at least begin qualifying and complying, with that subpoena. But they've been delaying as well, and it seems like they're trying to drag their feet here as well. Again, now Comer, the House Oversight Committee chairman, he's not really interested in the release of the Epstein Files. He's aware of how politically toxic this is for his party. And so I have no doubt that he's not going to hold the DOJ's feet to the fire only as much as he has to, and no more than that. But the Democrats, on the other hand, they're going to do everything in their power, and they should, to make this a nightmare for Trump and the Republicans. And you can bet your ass that to the extent that they have any oversight committee hearings in public, this will come up. And Democrats should. They should make a circus out of this in order to politically injure the GOP and Donald Trump, again, who promised that he would release these files, to say nothing of the fact that the surviving victims of Epstein want this information released. Now, obviously, again, with the necessary redactions, but they want the powerful people who may or may not be implicated in the Epstein files exposed. I'll also note that the DOJ apparently told Trump back in May, according to the Wall Street Journal, that Trump was mentioned multiple times in the Epstein files, which shouldn't be a surprise to anyone paying attention. But then we found out that the FBI actually redacted Trump's name from much of the Epstein files as well. So that will be interesting to see if the House Oversight Committee will receive the redacted version of the Epstein files that redact Trump's information, and whether or not the Republicans or the Democrats, rather, will be able to discern that and convey that to the American people. It's all very fascinating, but the fact that this has been quiet for the past several weeks, you should not just assume that that means that the focus has moved on. It's just that there hasn't really been anything to report. Well, this means there will be. So we'll be paying attention to it because, again, this was perhaps the most penetrative political scandal for Donald Trump, certainly of his second administration, and Democrats have every incentive to try to make it stick for as long as possible. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.